If for any reason you can't see this, just unmute and let me know, but I think it should be okay. My name is Rachel Lammy and I'm Head of Special Programmes at Crossref, but for the purposes of today, I'm one of the co-chairs of the Scholarly Link Exchange or working group. So welcome to the session today. Enough speakers which should cover a lot of aspects about Scholix. I'm going to start off with a bit of an introduction, maybe if you're newer to the area or if you just need a reminder. We're going to take a run through Scholix in numbers from Paolo, Martin and from Joris, who are going to talk from their various perspectives. And then Stephanie Hosteen from the Meaningful Data Counts project is going to look at Scholix through a bibliometrics lens. And finally, Ian Bruno is going to take us through a bit of an open discussion about potential ways forward for Scholix, areas that still need to be addressed, etc. So we hope that you'll hang around for that and be able to share your thoughts and comments and ideas. We'd really welcome your input. So by way of an introduction, as with many things, the best idea is to start with the problem. So linking data with literature is something that we all agree is of great value, and maybe the current solutions aren't fully realizing the potential of that. Certainly that was the case and the reason why the group was formed. The problem being that there are lots of disconnected sources, publishers, data centers, repositories, and lots of different practices between different persistent identifier systems, different ways of referencing data, and different moments of citing data, a lot of which we're kind of still grappling with today. And I've actually just linked to a Zenodo post that we put out through Make Data Count that talks about some of these challenges and how we propose a way forward for the community. So as said, in the past, links between data and literature were communicated using lots of different practices. So maybe a bilateral agreement between a repository and a publisher, or a repository and a data center and a publisher. And there were differences inherent in these agreements, limited interoperability between the various solutions, and that was just fueling inefficiencies and limiting the value of how this information was being able to use and reused across the kind of scholarly ecosystem. So working towards a standard set of guidelines and hubs that collect and disseminate this information is just a much more efficient way of working and sharing the information. Another question that comes up a lot is what is Scholix? Is it some people? Is it a thing? At its most, at the simplest, it's an initiative about linking research data with the literature and vice versa. But mainly, I see it in terms of standardizing. It's a schema or a framework for standardizing the exchange of scholarly link information between scholarly infrastructure providers, and that being an information model and the recommendation and provision of exchange formats and protocols that are a fit with the FAIR data principles. I would also say that Scholix is also the community who share that information and those links so that they can be reused in a standard way. So the information model, again, at its most basic, and certainly the way that we've implemented it at Crossref, is it's a subject and object relationship connected with a relationship. So the source object plus identifier, so something like, say, a data set in a data repository, what that links to, and the relationship type between the two items. And then you can supplement that with lots of additional information, such as the object type, what kind of thing is it, the creator, publication date, and lots of additional information depending on what the hub is able to support. So I think at the top level, it would be good to talk about the benefits, and those are different for different sets of organizations. I'd say for data repositories and journal publishers, it helps to increase the visibility and usage of links between articles and data. That helps to improve the user experience, so helping anyone reading the paper be able to make links easily between the research and the underlying data. And the fact that the information is machine readable makes it more scalable and robust. So say, like, one of the approaches, I guess, before Scholix is that it was more difficult to link papers with the data, even years after publication of the data. So this was a data set that was published back in 2016 as a supplement to a paper from 2011. So the related article had already been printed for 5 years, but it was difficult to add the citation of the data set to the paper, certainly to things like PDFs. And even though, you know, the data set was able to link to the paper, but when that information is then provided in the metadata related to the data, so the DOI landing page, publishers were able to develop a workflow to then add this information to the landing page of the paper, direct with a link back to the data. So you can see, yep, this is something that's good to do going forward, but it can also supplement those kind of links in papers and data that have been published earlier on. So creating, I guess, a richer set of information about the links between articles and data. So Scholix has helped establish this, and then there's the links to the data on the landing page again to help researchers find the underlying information. And I think looking at the benefits for research institutes, bibliographic service providers, and funding bodies, as I said, we work with Make Data Count, who are trying to take a pragmatic and sensible approach to towards data metrics, and also gives the capacity to be able to track data sets and publications within a common and comprehensive framework. So different people aren't trying to measure different things in lots of different ways that aren't actually comparable at all. Looking at some data, this is from an earlier presentation that Boiler gave as a previous chair, but you can see that there is impact in sharing data related to articles. So this model from SciVal, you can see that in terms of collaborations, citations, all of the US articles and proceedings sit sort of further back in the table, but those outputs that are actually linked to data sets correlate with higher citations and also increased collaborations in the work. And there was also a recent paper published in PLOS, and it clearly associates a citation advantage of up to 25.36% with articles that have a Category 3 data availability statement. So those including a link to a repository via a URL or other permanent identifier. And that's consistent with the results of previous smaller, more focused studies. So again, you can see that there are advantages also in terms of the use and reuse of the research. And finally, and definitely not least, is the researchers. So easier finding and accessing underlying data or research linked to that data, tracking the long-term impact, and it might feed into additional incentives to share data as well. As said, again, a quick example in this paper on Scopus, it's easy to find and link to the related research data in the Cambridge Crystallographic Database. So you're able to link to and find the chemical structures and related information really simply. And at Taylor and Francis, I'm able to click on a link to the supplemental data, and I can find, again, lots of related research data, more from CCDC, which isn't a plug to Ian, who's speaking later. But again, you can see that this is, an easy and simple way for researchers to find the information, and those links come from Scholar Explorer, which Paolo will talk about in more detail. In terms of the hubs that share the information, we've got several of those represented on the this afternoon. Datasite and Crossref work on a shared event data service that shares the links between Crossref DOIs and Datasite DOIs and vice versa. OpenAir, which collects a lot of this information centrally, and also Europe PubMed Central. So what that means is the hubs do a lot of the harvesting, look at resolution, deduplication of the information, and then provision of the information as well. And so sort of making sure, doing a lot of quality control with the information, and then making it available to the community for use. And I think because of this, the use cases and examples for the information are continuing to grow over time. And so I think, as I said, bibliometrics is a new and interesting angle to take in this. So as I said, the computer readability is key. So having an API for to be able to use the information in different in other services and systems, but also, as I said, a web user interface, which means just easy discovery and navigation of the information for the community. And just a quick timeline to show you how we've got to where we've got to. Things started back in 2014. I think the hardest part of the working in the slides was making this one extend up to 2021. But you can see there have been different iterations of the schema, resulting in version 3, which was published in November 2017. And really, although the Scholix group is in maintenance mode, we continue to meet every month and talk about ideas around adoption, maintenance, and those are some of the questions that we want to pose to you later in this session. So without further ado, wanted to thank you all for coming along to the session today. I've done kind of my introduction, and it feels fair to kind of, I think it feels fair to maybe hand over to Paolo now, and start to look at the numbers and what they can see from the OpenAir perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Let me share my screen. I hope everything was fine. Application window. Here we go. Okay. Can you see my slides in full?
Not in full. I think if you turn your video off.
Yes, I have to share it before. Wait a second. Let me switch it off. Open the screen and then share it back again. That should work. If I can only find the window again. Okay. Now you should be able to see it. Can you?
Yes, we can. So I'm going to turn off my mic now. But yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So first of all, this is the first concept that I would like to deliver to the audience, because that's a very common misunderstanding. So as Rachel explained, there is a difference between Scholix, which is an initiative focusing on the definition and the endorsement of data model and exchange formats for scholarly exchange, scholarly links exchange. So in this case, we focused on data sets and publications, but there are some other open discussions that will take place into this group about extending this model. So it's an initiative that spins around the definition and agreement and the convergence towards a common way to share links. And Skolexplorer. Skolexplorer is instead a service that takes advantage of this framework. On the other side, let's say at the end of the stream. So if the framework is adopted by data sources to export their links towards some form of third-party consumers, Skolexplorer is exactly one of those third-party consumers. So it takes advantage of all the compatible sources, collects these links, and somehow aggregates them. Okay, so it builds today probably the largest graphing collection of links between articles and datasets, and also datasets and datasets. And the workflow that is in place and behind it consists in the data collection, which has to be made quite often, depending on the data sources and how up to date they're kept in terms of the way they export the links. Aggregating all this information, which in many cases comes directly as Scholix. In other cases, it comes through other formats, for example, data sites. So there's a harmonization challenge there to be taken into account. So we harmonize. We resolve where it is necessary the PIDs. And this is the case, for example, when we collect an object which is expressed in DataSite, from which we have the core metadata regarding the object, plus an external link to another object, right, which we don't necessarily have in-house already, so we need to resolve it. And the third problem is the one of the duplication, because the sources from which we're collecting are not mutually exclusive in terms of the objects they deal with and in terms of the links they provide. So for each of the objects that we collect, we try to bring in all the different records that may describe the very same object and build a new one, which is somehow representatives of everything that we collected. So this is done in the spirit of keeping a track of all the sources that contributed to the construction of the object, and at the same time to build a richer object. So when we offer APIs to the outside world, for example, to resolve an identifier, you may have the same object resolved to different identifiers. For example, publications that have a DOI and a PMC ID. Okay, the very same object will respond to different persistent identifiers, and therefore return the related links. Skolexplorer exposes the data using Scholix. It adopts Scholix, and it's free at the point of use today. Okay. So this is roughly the things as this is how things stand today, and it's a very high-level sketch. But you can think of Skolexplorer as an aggregator of sources, mainly coming from the Crossref universe for the publications, Datasite for the data, but not necessarily. We know that these two sets unfortunately overlap. MOLBI for the bio entities, which are extremely important and open up extremely important challenges. We could talk forever about this. And OpenAir, which represents itself the collection of repositories, which are starting to show and expose links from publications to datasets in general, and other sources, all those sources who are willing to comply and expose links according to Scholix, and are, of course, trusted by the scientists. So as following the process that I described before, collection, harmonization, and the duplication, we build this collection. And the collection is provided to the outside world through APIs, which are today in use by repositories, data repositories, publishers, but also companies to provide statistics to the outside. Here I'm mentioning Elsevier because it's one of our major collaborations, but there are also SMEs, for example, who are taking this data to build and offer their own goods, their own offers. We also publish the data as dump, as a data dump. We do it in Zenodo. This is in between every 6 months, but that's the way we expose the data. And we have a very simple web UI, which basically we use mainly to test the collection every time we generate it. You can find all this information and more at the link below, and there are also a couple of papers you may be interested in that describe the whole workflow and how this works. We receive around 2 billion hits per month. This is due to the fact that the system is now fully integrated with several other systems which are using it as an on-demand kind of service. So every time users open their pages or repositories in Europe, in Scopus actually makes a big difference of this chunk, we receive a hit on the APIs. And that has something that we have to deal with, of course. Now, numbers. Numbers varied a lot over time, and this depended on several aspects, which I don't have the time to go through here in this presentation, but one of the most important aspects, of course, is the data sources. So how many data sources we had from how many we collected. So when we started back in March 2018 with the very first production service, because we started before that with the beta, we counted 61 million links. These are bi-directional, so you have to count 120 million, in fact. And we counted around 9 million objects, of which I don't even remember the distribution between data sets and publications. As you can see, 1 year later, the objects increased, not the data sources, but they increased. And that was due also to the fact that we enhanced the crosswalk. So the mappings, for example, would clarify better what was a data set, what was not a data set, which kind of links had to be taken into account. And this exposes one of the issues today. What is a data set? Which are the links that we are supposed to include in such a big data citation index, because this is not obvious, and how we should behave. And surprisingly, well, not surprisingly, we found out that this is very domain specific as a choice, and we should discuss with this about this with the specific communities. This came clearly up when EMBL, EDI, and Crossref started sharing their information. And as you can see, the increase was major, right, 4 months later, right? So we went to close to 1 billion links, okay? And that was a big impact on all our backends, on everything we're doing, and also implied that we took decisions on what to do with these links. For example, it's not clear how to organize an index where you have links between sequences and publications, which are conceptually different from links between publications and a table on Figshare, right? So they are different in terms of citations and reuse. We included Crossref. We started experimenting with the event data service of Crossref, so many links came from the publishers as well. In April 2021, so 2 years later, as you can see, the links, the objects increased, but the links are less, right? And that is due to the fact that we enhanced the duplication behind it. The duplication behind it was based on limits that we had to impose due to the incredible amount of data that we had, which we could overcome. So we came up with not better, but let's say more inclusive deduplication processes, which reduced the number of individual links that we could count. Because in fact, they were the same links, right, but distributed across different objects, which are now put together, and therefore we could obtain a more fine-grained and refined results. There are several things that we can do on this front to improve the data, the quality of the data, and basically handle the low quality of the information that we receive. Not low quality, but let's say the missing interpretation to which we have to find a solution to the information that we collect. So that's roughly all from my side. So if you have any other question, we can expand them later during the meeting. Yeah, that was really, thanks, Mustafa. That was exactly the feeling we had doing this work. We enjoyed it a lot because we collaborated a lot and very well, and we provided really operational services for the good of the community. So it's really satisfactory. Okay, so it's all on my side. Is there more information about the person? Kali, yes, there's a lot of information. If you're interested, we can take it offline. I'm not sure this is the place and moment to discuss these things, but yes, everything we do is more than open to discussion, and so we can take it offline.
I need a second, Paolo, to get the slide sharing going. That's
okay.
A little challenge. So that's another question.
So, yes, so about the harmonization and the collection, we have, OpenAIRE has a full system. We're collecting from 99,000 sources overall. And not all of them, of course, provide links. So just a very small subset, I think it's about 24 sources are exposing links. Anyway, you have to take into account that for each data source, we have different workflows. Each of them is based on different APIs and formats and transformation rules. And these are run and performed, carried out, let's say, on a systematic basis, which depends on the relationship with the data source. So we start with the configuration, and then the system does everything it can by itself. And we track everything of this. So we know what happened if something failed. We have special relationships. For example, with DataSite, we try to be aligned every 15 minutes. That's the SLA that we have with DataSite. So we access their APIs. Of course, this means that some of the information that you find on our index is not being deduplicated, because the duplication is a massive workflow that we run every week, roughly. So you find the links, right, which hopefully are so new that they don't have any duplicate. But every 2 weeks, you can find them fully deduplicated through the index. Are you done, Martin?
I'm in hell, so I suggest that Joris goes next, who is speaking after me, so I have more time to sort this out. Are you ready to go,
yeah.
Joris? Yeah.
I hope I don't end up in the same hell. So let me see. Can you see my screen? I assume you can. If not, let me know. So hello everyone. My name is Joris Verholsum. I'm the research integrity director at STM. So in case you don't know STM, it's an Association for Scientific, Technical, and Medical Publishers. We started the research data year last year, and the reason we started this is really a lot of the work that has been done at the RDA, but also at other organizations around research data. Development of research data policies. Let me see if I can make this bigger. Yes. Data availability statements, and of course, Scholix. So the research data year, which actually continued and which is now called the Research Data Program, is really designed to help publishers to adopt these practices, these services, these tools, these standards, etc. So it's an action-based program. So it's really focused on increasing the adoption. So we have currently about 21 publishers, and really it's a nice mix of the large ones and the small society, non-commercial publishers and everything in between, in really all subject areas. And very important, we work intensely with other partners in the ecosystem. Of course, we're not alone as publishers. We have funders, we have repositories, plus, of course, a lot of organizations. So also in our steering committee, we have a good representation of all important actors in this ecosystem. So the focus of last year was on share, link, and sites. So share is really focused around allowing journals to their authors to share data, which primarily means adopting journal policies, data sharing policies. For this, we made use of the great work done at the RDA around the data sharing framework, which we recommend to the publishers. So last year, we started with, on average, 29% of the journals having a policy to 52%, which is not 100%, and it takes time, but it's a good development. Another important, before I start to talk about Scholix, is data availability statements, which is, of course, a very important means to stimulate authors on the one hand to share the data, but also to inform the public that where and if the data is available. So last year, again, with the efforts and making use of experience by publishers like Biomed Central and PLOS that have really made very good strides with this, that increased from 7% on average to 15%. So that's really great development. Another focus was linking and citing research data. And of course, that all has to do with Scholix. It is really a very important aspect of research data in our view, but also it pertains to the thing that was mentioned earlier by Rachel. It's about incentives and motivation. And research shows that really getting cited and getting credit for work is one of the main motivators for researchers to share their data. So Scholix is really, really important for us. So we stimulate the publishers to adopt Scholix, which means which means that basically submitting linking metadata to Crossref, so that Crossref processes it and pushes it to event data, as Rachel explained before. So our focus has been very much on helping publishers to adopt it, to adopt the processes so that the information can be submitted to Crossref in the appropriate way. And we have been working intensely with Rachel and other people. Yeah, many thanks again for that. So how did we do? Well, you can see a little graph here. So journals that connect to Scholix. But we have actually, in light of transparency, but also in light of data, we created a dashboard basically showing people where we are in terms of our performance. So we this is something about the journals, participating journals, journal policies, but this is about Scholix. So you can see the green graph here. It shows that 30% of the publishers now deposit their data to Crossref, so that it's included in Scholix, and 43% of journals. So that is okay, but that's of course a work in progress. And the main barrier really is for the publishers that they have to adopt their systems, and it's not so much complicated as it is just one of the things they have to do on their list. So hence also, our commitments to further support them in that. So we expect this to take another, let's say, 2 years before all the publishers and at least the participating publishers submit their data to Crossref, so it will be included in Scholix. This is something about the overall. So you see that about 35 publishers overall now submit the data to Crossref. So we're not there yet, but it's good progress. And from the side of STM, certainly the commitment to support publishers to make this 100% as soon as possible. And let me stop my screen. I saw that I see that I forgot to put on my camera, so let me just do that still. All right. No, I can't share my camera somehow, so. Yes, there I am. Sorry, last minute.
Okay, so I'm fighting with technology, which is wonderful, but let me give it one more shot. Otherwise, move on to the next speaker. Are there questions for Joris? That I see there's one question from Carly. Do you want to address this? Yeah.
Martin, are you using Chrome?
No, I have a PDF, and if I share this in Chrome, there's issues if I share the application.
Okay, because I was told by others that Chrome works much better than any other browser with the,
yeah.
you know, yep.
Can
you send me the?
Because we don't have much time, Stephanie, are you ready to go?
Send me the presentation. I will show it for you.
Okay, but we can still have Stephanie go first because that will take a moment if you are ready.
I am ready, but I also wasn't able to share my slides. So if one of you could do that for me, I can try again, but.
Martin, if you want to share them on Skype, and Stephanie as well.
Sorry, that was the wrong chat. So if one of the moderators could share my slides. They also, yeah.
I'm trying. Hold on a second.
Tricky platform for everyone.
Okay, you have it. Otherwise, I can do it. Okay, fine.
I don't think I'm going to be able to. Let's see.
I have it ready if you want.
Okay, go ahead.
That would be great. They're also in Zenodo.
It's strange though.
I don't have the link right now, but I've shared after my talk.
Can you see it?
Yes, perfect. All right. So I want to introduce the Meaningful Data Counts research project today. Just as a quick outline, so I'll briefly introduce the project, and then I really want to focus on what we're working on right now, which is the problem of determining disciplines and how essential it is to define them or determine them for constructing any kind of metrics. I'm going to show you very preliminary results because the project just started, and then talk about next steps. So next slide, please. So this is kind of how we put the motivation for the project in a nutshell. So what we're seeing right now is that not a lot of researchers actually share and particularly don't cite data sets because there is a lack of incentives and rewards in academia. So we're not really rewarding this. You all know about the issue. And because there isn't a lot of data about this, because people don't have as also, we don't have a lot of best practices that we should use for studying research data and constructing metrics, and the use cases are really missing. And finally, that's why we haven't developed any meaningful metrics. And that kind of feeds back into the lack of incentives and rewards. Next slide, please. We kind of want to turn this, what we now see as this vicious circle that feeds into each other, into a positive feedback loop. So we want to create rewards and incentives for researchers, which in turn would lead to more research on data sharing, which would develop best practice, where we could create meaningful metrics, and those would then help to further incentivize sharing, reusing, and citing data. Next slide. And our research project, so the Meaningful Data Counts research projects, which is funded by the Sloan Foundation and is kind of a sister project of the Make Data Count initiative. So we're kind of the research arm, and for focusing more on the basic research and empirical data. We kind of want to focus on this doing research and providing empirical evidence on research data sharing. And we want to look at patterns of data sharing and reuse, and particularly citations. And we want to do this across all scholarly disciplines. And we already know that disciplines are a really important factor when it comes to showing or looking at different patterns. And we also want to look further down the road at career status. So we think that's also a factor that influences whether people share, reuse, and cite data sets. And our approach is mixed methods. So we have a quantitative approach that is mostly focused on bibliometrics and a survey. And we want to look into data sharing and citation patterns across disciplines and career status. And then we also have a qualitative approach, which looks at motivations of researchers to share or not share and cite data. So our focus is here on basically providing evidence that will eventually help us to create more meaningful data metrics. Next slide, please. So the research project that is not by any means me alone, but I'm working together with Isabella Peters at Kiel University and the Leibniz Center for Economics, who's the co-PI on this project. And we have two really wonderful postdocs that we just hired, Kathleen Gregory, who just defended her PhD on research data, and then Anton Ninkov. And they're working on, just started to work on these aspects. So we're focusing on a bibliometric analysis that we've just started. We also have a PhD student, Asura Angbarya, who's working on a citation theory, and will incorporate data citation as part of that. And we're really proud of that because particularly in bibliometrics, there isn't a lot of theory work going on, and we're happy that we can implement it from the beginning. And we're also using a survey, or we're planning on a survey, and finally semi-structured interviews to complement it and get more in-depth data and on the differences between disciplines, but particularly also on the motivations and the lack of motivation to share and cite research data. Next slide, please. So you probably all know this. There are just some references here that have already shown us that we know that data sharing and reuse varies extremely by discipline. So even what is considered data from one discipline to the next, and even subfields, can be very different. So we often think about structured data, maybe in a relational format, or CSV files when we think about data, but certainly also the social sciences, thinking about interviews, for example. Interview transcripts are data too, even though we don't really maybe think of that in the first place. We do know that this the fact of how prominent data are also reflects in whether researchers share and also reuse data in different disciplines. And this is really, really important down the road when we think about metrics, because if we want to reward researchers for their data sharing activities, then we need to take into account creating benchmarks that work for every discipline. We don't want to end up repeating the same mistakes that we did in bibliometrics, where we have indicators that aren't normalized by field. So for example, if you think about the journal impact factor or the H-index, it really depends on what disciplines you publish in, because that affects your publication behavior or how much you publish in a year or so. And we also already know this for citation behavior. We do know that citing data sets also differs by discipline. We have some ideas of this, but we haven't done this kind of as a large overview to compare all scientific disciplines with each other and kind of go towards creating meaningful benchmarks. So there's a really great PhD thesis in the works by Stephanie van der Zandt at at CERN, who is actually looking at 2 different disciplines, high energy physics and social sciences, and she has already discovered lots of different behaviors in citing or mentioning data sets in the full text, how it's done, how complete the metadata is, and so on. And it's also been showing us that there's lots of more work to do. When we want to determine disciplines of data sets, that's actually really tricky. So it's not really easy. The most straightforward approach would be intellectually, and this is mostly done by users. So when you upload a data set to a repository, then often the highest quality data you can get is if the user entered it, or sometimes there's also archival staff that helps with this kind of metadata. So basically the user, the generator of the data set, will tell us what discipline they see themselves in. But there are also automated approaches. And we see this more and more for some databases that start including data sets now, that they're trying to adapt what they've done or what they know from publications or journal articles. So they're trying to determine the discipline of the data set based on metadata that the data set has itself. So if there is a title in an abstract, that's fantastic. And they can kind of do text mining or maybe machine learning approaches to determine the discipline. But we also know that metadata isn't always that complete. That data set is. And there are also other approaches that if we don't have metadata available for the specific data set, then maybe we can use proxies that come from external additional sources. So we're thinking here about connecting the data set to a journal article or to the authors via the authors of the data set and see what else they have published, so that we can maybe infer a discipline from their publication behavior, because it's very likely if they've always published on cancer research that their data sets would also be cancer research. But that's a more indirect way to do it, and it's also much more complex, but we are looking into these, and there have been a couple of studies that have looked into this. So there are different ways to try to infer discipline, but in general it's quite tricky, and the best approach intellectually by the user, the problem there is that a lot of repositories don't have this information. Next slide, please. So just some quotes here too. I also want to just highlight the book again by Daniela, John Martin, and colleagues that basically describes this whole data metrics approach. And they also highlight a lot that we have differences between disciplines, and we need to take those into account. We can't really create meaningful metrics if we haven't solved the discipline issue. Next slide, please. And here's some very, very preliminary results. So Anton, our postdoc, has started to analyze the data sets that are currently in Dataset. So out of all entities that are in Dataset, 8.6 million are data sets, and only 6.2 of those have some discipline information in their metadata. So we already see we have a big problem here because more than 90% of all data sets, we don't know what disciplines they come from. When we look at among those 6%, what are the most prominent fields, we see that the biggest chunk is biological sciences, then we have earth and environmental sciences, health sciences, chemical sciences, and so on. But again, this is not very meaningful because we're missing discipline information for the majority of the data, majority of the data sets, which is why we can't really say much about metrics, where we think it's essential to have discipline information. And then if we look at how many of the data sets and data sites actually get citations, which is what we want to use as kind of showing data sets have been used and are useful to others, only 1.1% of all data sets and data site currently have citations. And if we combine those, so if we look at data sets that have both discipline information and citations, we're at 0.01%. So we really have a big issue here that the current data doesn't allow us to create any meaningful metrics. And what we think we have to do is that we need to add more discipline information. But we also need to encourage people to get used to citing this. And this is obviously a behavior change, which is always difficult. But I also want to just look back. We always think that citing in journal articles, having references has always been there, is very common. And in fact, this has only been common for a bit more than 100 years. So like in the beginning of the 20th century is when reference lists really started to become a thing in journal articles. So maybe that's something to be optimistic about, that we can change things around with data sets as well. Next slide. And that's actually what the whole Make Data Count initiative is all about, that to implement it in communities, to make it more normal to add data sets in the reference lists. So what we want to do next, and what is on the agenda of our research project, is that we want to improve the discipline information, because we really think that we can't start talking about constructing good metrics if we don't have discipline information. So we've had discussions with the Make Data Count community and DataSite about what classification system to select. So here is also the perfect is the enemy of the good. I could talk for days about the pros and cons of different classification systems. I think in a nutshell, there isn't a perfect one. And we kind of selected the OECD fields of science and technology that were first.
Yeah, Stephanie, we lost you. Is any of our presenters able to rejoin? Hi, Martin.
Yeah, I'm here, but
Okay.
so I think it's her next to last slide. I'm also starting to worry about our discussion because we only have 33 minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Were you sort of in your closing statement, Stephanie?
Yeah. So basically, we have selected the OECD because we've compromised, and it has a large and there are lots of statistics. Yeah, and the next steps are now to improve disciplinary information, and we would really like to encourage repositories to implement that the users can select a discipline when they submit their data set or upload their data set, ideally using the OECD classification system. But I think we're also at a point where any disciplinary information would be great. We also want to, in DataSite, define the discipline basically on disciplinary repositories. We can do that, and Martin and Christian are working on that. And then we're looking at the more automated approaches to either include derive something from the metadata that's available, or look at other sources. And that's basically what we want to do. And there are references at the end of my slides if you want to look into the literature, and I'm looking forward to any comments and questions. Thank you.
And while you answer the question or two, I can have a final attempt to get my slides going with the help of Paolo.
Slide.
And I can't really see all the questions because I'm probably not refreshing, and I don't want to refresh because then I'll be kicked out again maybe. So maybe, yeah, if you have a question. I'm trying to scroll up here. Oh yeah, so Shelley was asking if it's possible to look at the percentage of citation by discipline. Yes, we actually have that data. Because of time limits, I wasn't looking into it. We're presenting this at the ISSI conference in July, but I'm also happy to share our preprints soon. I think we're submitting it next week, so I'll be happy to share that with you, Shelley. The problem is, though, because we're talking about 1.1% of all the data sets that have disciplines and citations, I don't know how helpful this information is. It is to know the distribution by discipline. It's such a small percentage.
Can you now see the screen? Scholix in numbers.
I can see my slides. Amazing, Paulo.
They're beautiful.
I think we're way over time. So, Ian, how do we do this? Because we have 30 minutes left in this session, and there's sort of 7 slides to go, and hopefully good discussion. Something I do is a short version of this and try to finish in 5 or 6 minutes, which is not.
If can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, if there is a 5 or 6 minute version, then that works. I think, yeah, because that will still leave us sort of 25 minutes.
Okay, so Paolo, if you go to the first slide, I will give a short presentation of Scholix in numbers from a data side cross-ref perspective, and we'll highlight a few things, for example, discipline information that Stephanie talked about. So this is just to say data sets and publications are part of a bigger graph of connections, which includes people, organizations, funding, software. And if you look carefully between the red and blue dot, there's a number of 6 million. That's the connections of data sets and publications that we have between DOIs, where we think it's a data citation and not something else like a version. This is a Jupyter notebook that generated this. There is a link there, and when we share the slides, it might be easier to just follow this and run this for yourself. The next slide is about where do the data citation come from, and what we see is that data site members and repositories are more active in this than Crossref members right now, which is the top number, is that more than 90% of the data citations we see come from repositories. And what we also see is that, of course, we also have data citations within data sites. So a publication with, for example, in Zenodo or Figshare, linking to a data set, also the data set DOI. And the number cross-ref to data site is low also because there have been technical difficulties, so that shouldn't be taken as that's everything there is, but that hopefully will much improve going forward. And then just sort of completeness, you see, of course, Crossref also has data sets, and of course, they're also cited by other Crossref DOIs, so we sometimes see there. And the last one is interesting, which is open citations, that Crossref metadata are much more open thanks to the open citation initiatives, and we then, of course, also see data site DOIs in the reference lists of these open citations, which is just to say, just between Crossref and data site, there's lots of ways so information can be changed. In the next slide, Dataset metadata allows to say what kind of relation type exists, and you see the vast majority is references or flavors of this, like sites or is referenced by. Supplement to is something that's important, and that also the Scholix schema allows. And then what you also see is documented by, and when you go to the next slide, because I have to be quick, you see sort of some repositories and Crossref members that have contributed a lot of links or were linked to in the case of Crossref also. And you see ICPSR, which is a data repository of the social sciences. And I mention this because they, for data citation use, is documented by, and they have been doing this for many years before there was Scholix. That explains why there's this one relation type in there. The short version is really, the relation type is not really helpful. It just leads to frustrations and sort of extra work. The only exception that many people care about is supplement to, but this very much aligns with the desire to have data validity statements. So if you want to say the data in this paper were generated for this paper, that typically goes in a data validity statement, and the relation type is not really adding much extra information. Just on the publisher side, you see pretty large publishers and also Pensoft. The reason is mainly the list on the left, that we have by far the largest numbers of data citation links from GBIF, which is the biodiversity community where Pensoft published a lot of papers. So that's the connection there. that Pensoft is sort of, we have a lot of them because there's lots of biodiversity links. The next slide. And you can sort of take your time in looking in the slides again at a later time when we make them available. This is a slide I really wanted to show, but it didn't quite work out, which is, do we see an increase in data citations in event data? And the fact is that the numbers go up dramatically, but that's unfortunately more a technical problem, or that's the way we track this information, that this is not totally correct, that basically we have to redo the data. That's a harder, more work that we could do in preparation for the session. So that needs to be updated in the future. The next slide is just a reminder of the information we have about subject areas. These numbers are a little bit better than what Stephanie showed, so it's 8.6% of data sets. And what we're going to do next is sort of call out to all the very active data repositories in DataCite that basically cover only one discipline, whether it's chemical structures, whether it's earth environmental sciences, because OECD is really on this level. It doesn't really care about sub-disciplines. So we hope to make good progress there in the next few months, and then come back to Shelley about, can we say anything about disciplines? It also means, I mean, we have started this only a year ago. So we had 0 in last summer, and we started by mapping to other subject classification, like the Australia New Zealand one. We encouraged our users to submit disciplinary information and made it easier for them. So we hope that we can say something on this topic, which really, as Stephanie pointed out, is really essential for understanding citation. And the last slide is, and just as a side note, Crossref currently doesn't do discipline information. So there's more data about discipline information for publication, but it's usually indirect, for example, based on the journal where something is published in, and it works well in some cases, but not at all in other cases. And the last slide, I know there has also been an RDA group. What's the license information of the data sets we have? And it's a little bit unfortunate that there are many, many data sets without clear license information. And even if they use Creative Commons, you see sort of what most people recommend, CC 0 is not the most popular license. We have no idea whether this affects citation behavior, because strictly speaking, this is unrelated to citation, but there's such a variety of licenses just within CC Creative Commons that it's possible that this is also a factor that we should look at in more detail, whether that sort of hinders people of citing data or reusing data because there's for example, a non-commercial CC license attached to the data set. And with that, I stop, and I'm really sorry for the delays in this session, but I hope we have a little bit of time left for a discussion, and that's led by Ian.
Thank you very much, Martin. Can people hear me? Yes. Good. Right. I'm going to paste in the chat a link to, well, a number and a link, because well, okay, let's see what happens when I post that. Yes, you should have a URL followed by a number, because we're going to do a quick poll and we want to get your thoughts on priorities for Scholix. And if you follow that link, you should come to a set of options and you'll have 2 votes. And while you're doing that, I will just quickly share my screen. That's the wrong button again. I'll do the entire screen and see how we go. And now you should be seeing a slide. I can't necessarily see if you can. You're telling me I can see a slide, so I'll wait until I'll keep going until someone says they can't see a slide. And this is showing some of the topics that frequently come up when we're talking about Scholix, particularly sort of over this maintenance period that we've been having. Coverage and adoption is kind of is really where we've been focusing, I think. We heard from Joris about the sort of initiatives going on to get journal publishers adopting Scholix. And you think about adoption by data repository, and we've heard a lot today way by looking at how different domains have been adopting it. But I think another part of adoption is thinking about PIDs beyond the DOI. Scholix had as its foundation, I think it had in its mind, quite at the forefront of its mind in the early days, the DOI. I think Paolo's talked about how he sort of interacted with EBI, where you get into areas where different accession IDs are being used. So we have moved into that space. Workflows are quite important here. Our experience at CCDC, we kind of want to use Scholix-based mechanisms as a basis for our workflows with publishers, because then we'll have a common way of doing things. But we do need to have confidence that everything gets updated in a timely manner. And there is perhaps the issue that not all publishers have migrated their platforms in the way that Elsevier has to sort of actually be using Scholix-based workflows. Relationship types was touched on, and a lot of discussion went into defining the Scholix schema and working out how few relationship types to have, and we decided to keep it simple. Sometimes people say we'd like more relationship types. Martin, I think, has reflected that as a debatable as to how much it matters what the relationship type is. This is a topic that comes up. And then the other question that commonly comes up is, well, should you extend Scholix to other areas? Yeah, that to include other types of research objects. And so the poll questions are really to just get your thoughts on what you think some of those priorities might be. And I'm hoping Rachel's been monitoring the poll and we'll have an idea of whether or not people have been actually adding their responses to it. Rachel, are you there?
Yes, I am, and I have been. So let me see if I can quickly share the poll results on my screen. That should work.
It is indeed working, yeah. This is fantastic, and it's still tweaking slightly, and adoption by organizations comes out as that #1 priority. Modest responses as well to the other types of research object. That's an interesting one. We got 18 minutes. Okay, cool. Improving workflows, supporting different types of PIDs. Right. Let me just double click. I'm conscious there's questions going on in the chat. I'm hoping that if people can keep an eye on chat and Q&A, we can be tracking in parallel. Adoption. I think one of the first questions that I want to pose is whether there are people here who want to adopt Scholix, but are struggling and don't know what to do. Does anyone want to volunteer one way or another that they're in that position? Or have a sense of what the barriers are to communities that they're working with? Do feel free to come off mute and chip in. So I think there's a comment there, which I don't know if this is in response to this, but one from Shelley. I'm not sure I understand the full potential of journal adoption, and I suppose this is actually one of the other questions is, what is our measure of success here? How do we know when we've sort of expanded adoption?
Like I would say some of the feedback that that we get at Crossref are, and I think this has come up in the chat already, is a little bit about workflows and the fact that publishers have to potentially change some of their workflows to accommodate this information. Sometimes issues with the non-recognition of non-cross-ref DOIs in reference lists as well. So all of which I think are things that we can tackle, but it does take tweaks to workflows between different systems over time. And Ian, I know you've been on the receiving end of that as well in the work that you do.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so I think there was a question earlier on, I think, about a data repository. Yeah, how does one contribute those links? And from that point of view, Datasite helps immensely if you can. But one of the key things there is capturing the link between a data and an article in the first place. And I think that's where the surrounding workflows come into this. In that, we have for years.
Can I stress this, Ian, a little bit?
Yeah.
Because we probably have a mixed audience of people that are interested in very specific question, and other people are relatively new to Scholix.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a cross-site member or a Datasite member, then your contribution to Scholix is the metadata you send when you register DOI or update the metadata. Everything you need is in there, and it's that this then travels on, goes to other places that we heard about today, but you don't have to do anything else than what you do with DOI metadata. That's really important, and I hope that didn't get lost in this sort of complexity of all the things we discussed today.
Yeah, that's true. I think the more challenging piece around that is then actually getting that association in the first place. And certainly in the case of some repositories, that's because they've got data sets. It's part of their role is to sort of identify the articles that are associated with those. And in the case of CCDC, we try to have automated workflows in place as much as possible, but it still does involve manual intervention. I think you're probably seeing me flick between my screen, aren't you? I mean, I guess the other interestingly, people did say other research objects, and so I suppose there are people there who are sitting there thinking, Scholix, it's not quite got it nailed for data article links, but it's on a trajectory that can only go from strength to strength. Can we now apply that to relationships between other objects? Does anyone want to volunteer what other objects they think it could or should be extended to? Conversely, does anyone want to say, no, just stick to data article links? You have to go and see what's
It's Paolo here.
Yeah, hi, Paolo.
I can elaborate on that, of course. So this is something that is already a discussion, an open discussion in OpenAIRE, where we took decisions already. So we have this classification of publications, data, and software, and the rest. So, and that's because software and data and publications are rather common and well-accepted object across disciplines. So we know what we're talking about, although with different interpretations, but we kind of have the same classifications across disciplines. While for some other kinds of objects, this may be very different. So the others is more the set of the collection of objects that are domain or community specific. But one thing that I wanted to add on the discussion, add to the discussion that we had before, and to Stephanie, is also that, of course, we're missing communities. Of course, we should push for people to use PIDs or to include more information, but we should also make sure that PIDs are properly used. And this is unfortunately not the case in many, many scenarios. So this is to say that whenever you use a PID to refer to some other kind of object, you may make a mistake. So it's not when you mint it, it's not when you get your PID that the mistake is made, but when you are including your PIDs as values of your metadata. That has to do with ORCID IDs, DOIs when you refer to other objects, and the amount of mistakes that are made out there is quite big. Also, misusage of this, right? For example, one common use case, which is bad, is that when people deposit the paper as a data set in Figshare, and they actually claim it is a data set, and they actually reuse the same DOI of the paper because they can, right? So this messes up completely whatever kind of indexing you're building. So relying on PIDs as the unique way to refer this ambiguous space may be dangerous. So we always double check with the title, with the authors, we do other things. And this is something we should be taking into account in our policies. So expose the data, but also expose the disciplines, but also make sure that your repository double checks what DOIs you are using and to refer to what.
Okay, thank you, Paolo. I think this question here about APIs planning, the repositories could use to update their metadata. I think that's a potentially untapped potential for Scholix. I think there's been a lot of focus on publishing the links, but what are those sort of downstream services that you can build on top of things like Scholix Explorer to sort of help with that kind of like information about who's referencing what? The example where I think that demonstrates potential is glossed on recently in one of Rachel's presentations is what Elsevier did with Scopus. They just used Scholix and started exposing links without the data repository having to do anything if they'd contributed to the links in the first place. And I guess there should already be potential for a repository to go in there, and if the links have been reported by someone, say what articles are associated with data sets that I hold, and I think Scholix Explorer and possibly event data may offer APIs that could be used that way.
A more general question is also about relationships. And I agree that this is an important question. I could only vote for 2 of the options, but relationships are extremely important. And it's not just because of the supplemented by and the citation or reference citation, but it's also because this is very nicely mixed with the user statistics. So it's very important, for example, to combine data citation with data usage, where data usage is not download and views, right? Download and views are probably bare bones information, which may work fine for publications, but I don't think they are satisfactory for data. So it would be very important, for example, to know when a data set has been processed and how many times. And that's much more valuable than knowing how many times it's been downloaded, which depends on too many factors: size of the data, kind of discipline, and so on. So there are so many things. So I think this would be very nice to extend. So have a place where you have citations, the way we intend them today, mixed up with user statistics that go beyond the simple visualization or download. And this would give us really the elements to evaluate the quality of a data set much more than today.
Just a reminder, as Paolo just said, that tomorrow is the session of the user statistics working group, which is wrapping up tomorrow with a set of recommendations that have been circulated. And also what you said, Paolo, reminds me of the balancing act we all do, and that's also obvious in the Mentimeter questions, between doing the simple stuff first before you go more complicated stuff. On the other hand, there are some complicated problems we want to address, and I think it's dangerous to say basically everything is too hard and we can only do something that's super, super simple and probably very manual. On the other hand, if we get lost in, we can now do Scholix is nice, we can do this for all kinds of research outputs, and there is a risk of getting lost, because it's very important for lots of us, I guess everybody in this meeting at least, but it's also a lot of work, and it also needs sort of many different systems and people to work together. It's not something that a single organization can sort of put off. And data usage, where we as Dataset are also involved, is a good example where we are not there yet, that views and downloads is something that we can get in a standardized open way. And that's why I'm very much for following that path. And if you by chance had the chance to read the blog post that some of us from the Make Data Count project posted yesterday, we make a very strong point for don't forget reference list. Reference list is what everybody is used to for the scholar literature, and putting data in there might look weird to some people, but it's just, there are so many expectations in researchers' heads, workflows and tools that exist, and we should sort of take advantage of this as much as possible, even though reference lists, for example, mean you don't have a relation type because it's in a reference list. And that's all you can say, at least the way reference lists look now. And I think this balancing act will come up all the time, that sometimes it's worthwhile to just do the most simple thing and push this. And sometimes we have to do something else. And I think one challenge for Scholix, even after we are in maintenance mode for some time now, is of course, what's the right path to take? Because there's so many different options how we can go. And sort of one issue that I just mentioned, but I don't think we have any time left, is what's the relationship of the activities with this group with data availability statements. It's very, very close, but it's not 100% clear to me how they relate to each other. But I stop here because we have only a few minutes left for maybe some good comments and discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Martin.